Do you take responsibility for failing to stop this fraud in your state?
Well, certainly I take responsibility for putting people in jail. Governors don't get to just talk theoretically. We have to solve problems. And I will note, it's not just Somalis. Minnesota is a generous state. Minnesota is a prosperous state, a well-run state. We're AAA bond rated, but that attracts criminals. Those people are going to jail. We're doing everything we can. But to demonize an entire community on the actions of a few, it's lazy.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz deflecting on the fraud schemes that prosecutors say led to the theft of more than $1 billion in taxpayer funds. Many of the defendants are members of the state's Somali community. Let's bring in Minnesota House Speaker Lisa DeMeth. She is running against Tim Walz for governor. That election is next year. Lisa, for people who are catching up from the holiday weekend, how would you describe the fraud that was happening in Minnesota?
Fraud in Minnesota under the watch of Governor Walz has exploded in his 7 years as governor. There are 28 known scandals of fraud, just over 7 years. And as you heard, Dana, he has said that he takes responsibility for putting people in jail, but he's never apologized to the taxpayers. He's never taken accountability of saying this has happened on his watch, and he's pushed it aside until I, as Speaker of the House, established the Fraud Prevention and Agency Oversight Committee this legislative session, and it has finally drawn national attention. Something that has gone on for years, $1 billion or more of fraud under Governor Walz, finally getting national attention. Thank you.
Speaking of that national attention, it's not just here on Fox News, but the New York Times wrote about it as well, saying that how fraud swamped Minnesota's social services system on Tim Walz's watch. And this is also a lawyer for one of the defendants saying no one was doing anything about the red flags. It was like someone was stealing money from the cookie jar and they kept refilling it. Lisa, there were whistleblowers who were ignored?
That is what we are hearing. And we did put additional whistleblower protection in during this last legislative session. We also tried to put in an Office of Inspector General, an independent Office of Inspector General, and the Democrats in the House denied us that opportunity. It had been passed in the Senate, bipartisan, and we could not get it through the House as a protection, I believe, for Governor Walz, not wanting that Office of Inspector General on an outside view looking in to see what he was really doing. I think he prevented that from going forward.
I'm going to read to you from the White House rapid response reaction saying that Tim Walz on the $1 billion fraud scandal that took place on his watch, I take responsibility for putting people in jail. It's not just Somalis. But they say this, number one, Walz didn't do jack other than let it happen. These are federal cases. And number two, 71 of the 75 people charged are of East African descent. Now, fraud can happen anywhere, under any circumstances, without proper safeguards. But what about this angle here in terms of the concentration of where the fraud was coming from?
As the governor said in the interview that we are a prosperous state and that would attract criminals, that is not true. We have poor leadership at the top here in Minnesota. What that means is criminals are going to be coming to Minnesota to do their criminal activity. That is a disrespect for taxpayer dollars, and it means at the very top of our state, fraud has been allowed to go forward for years unchecked. It is now, thank you to President Trump and the White House for getting the attention with the U.S. Attorney's Office, making those prosecutions happen. That's what we are grateful for,
Lisa,
because we've been trying to sound the alarm for years.
Let me jump in and ask you one last question. Sorry, I want to just ask you one last question before we run out of time. Do you believe that former Vice President Kamala Harris, who chose Walz to be her running mate in those 107 days of her campaign, do you think that she ever asked about this? I mean, when you're vetted to be the Vice President of the United States, should be a very serious vetting. Doesn't appear that anybody had this on their radar.
I don't know that she asked the question. I wouldn't be able to answer that, but obviously it was not vetted properly to see what was going on here in the state. We knew about fraud before Governor Walz ever became the vice president pick.
All right. Lisa, thank you. We'll follow the campaign as it heats up. Appreciate it.